Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Power Rangers Time Force. So, the first thing that I enjoyed about the show was a futuristic Power Rangers, where we have them being placed in the year 3000, and for one reason or another, they have to time travel to 2001 to defend whatever the current city is at that time period, the real legitimate time period. So, I really liked the futuristic part of this, and so uh, and I was easily won by the story within these first three episodes because I had never fully went on to watch Time Force just because I stopped watching Power Rangers somewhere around Turbo. And then I decided, I'm like, hey, let's go and see what Power Rangers in Space has to offer. Ooh, this is a really good show. And then, I kind of stopped after In Space, and, there's a whole video of me explaining this. So go ahead and check that out. Um, so Time Force. Time Force is actually a pretty decent Power Ranger show, and really it has an interesting concept. Uh, so yeah, really the one thing also about Power Rangers Time Force is it's actually fairly similar to Power Rangers Hyper Force, which of course is a YouTube thing that of course is to have a number of role-playing gamers who go on to become these custom-made Power Rangers, which is like, well, that's nice that they actually have like custom Power Ranger things, so it's not just like, oh, well, you're gonna be Tommy, you're gonna be Billy, you're gonna be Zach, you're basically just gonna be the same characters, and you're just gonna go through a role playing scenario like that. You're basically the same people. So it's nice to have like a custom thing where they actually also had morphers. That I was kind of like, oh, okay, so this is kind of cool that they at least had like a morphing sequence and morphers, and that was actually kind of cool for the show. So, going into this, what is this story about? We, of course, have a number of futuristic officers, and it seems that there are to be very few Power Rangers in the future because I guess uh, crime is at an all-time low, and so I guess we only need really one Power Ranger, who eventually is to be a guy named Alex. And for some reason or another, we go on and have this real threat called Rancic, who is to be imprisoned and then is to try to escape prison, and is to go on and want to time travel back to 2001. And so for one reason or another, we have four other Power Rangers who decide to go back in time in hopes of trying to take down Rancic, and eventually they find their fifth Power Ranger via means of which that I will go on into the spoilers and talk more about. So yeah, the first three episodes kind of feel like a story arcing thing, or I don't know, maybe every single episode is to kind of like cohesively be well attached to one another. Not quite sure, because I didn't go through and like see what every single episode of this show was to see if like, oh, is it a story arcing thing? Because I think the one thing that I don't like about a Power Rangers show is having to immediately be stuck with this oh, you have to watch the first 3 to 4 episodes. I'm like, what if I don't like the season all that well? What if it's a kind of garbage season? Like, you should just have it to where you only have us like rely on the one episode, just because the show might be garbage. Mark Garb. So, with that said, yeah, this one was fun, positive experience. Let's go out of our way to say that it's about that time to go into this thing called Time Force spoiler time. I don't know. So let's go into it. Let's go into that double five. Yeah, let me know if you are a Power Rangers Time Force person. Maybe this is your favorite season for whatever reason. Let me know what is your favorite Power Rangers Time Force or Power Rangers season. Maybe it's one that I have not seen yet. Let me know in the comments below anything about Power Rangers whatsoever. If there is some technical thing that I didn't say or I didn't say correctly during this show, because I know that I probably will, I'll probably mess something up. It's bound to happen. Let me know that in the comments below either, because that's great, because I love comments. So, with that said, let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time we can do spoiler. It's not morphing time, it's spoiler time. So, we go on into the very beginning of this show, and like I said, we of course have a number of other officers who are of course to be called Trip, Lucas, Jen, Katie, who of course are to be these officers who are kind of holding this perimeter with their blasters. And so we of course have Alex coming in to try and take down Rancid, who is to have this seemingly device that can take him back to a alternate time, because I guess if he cannot take down the present, then he's going to go back to the past and try to take down the past. Like, I would kind of have stories of that kind of thing happening where you'd have a character that eventually is to go on and have like some grudge that is to be so severe that he goes on or she goes on to go back either in time or to go like dimension hopping or whatever, to try to wipe out certain things. And like that's always a kind of fun or creative like story. And I think immediately that would be like Shattered Grid, which was actually a lot more interesting story than I thought it was going to be. But really, I'm just kind of more interested in the concept of that rather than like having me to like read over every single little bit of that whole story, and whichever, just because it's like a lot of just like, okay, we have the Time Force characters in, and we have these random other characters that just kind of add their way in this story. And no, now we have these characters that we have Hyperforce that's now in the Shattered Grid, and like I'm like, man, like Hyperforce, like they just did so well that they just freaking were everywhere, absurdly, and like it's kind of sad that that show only got one freaking season, because it's like, man, for how wildly just branched out that they all got into, man, did that just go up in smoke. Because they're like, yeah, we can't do this show anymore. Anyways, so we have Rancic that, of course, to battle it out against Alex, and Alex would have his time badge out. And we're going to probably go through a number of these technical words because we have to go on and say all these technical things. So that's going to be fun. So we, I think, have eventually where we have Alex, the Red Ranger, who whips out his Chrono Saber and is trying to battle out with, of course, Rancic. And Rancic is to kind of pull these kind of bones out of his body. And I'm like, oh my god, that is such a cool visual. And I'm like, man, I wish that they could have had some more of that stuff in the show. Just have it to where, like, we go on and we have these, like, elemental things where you kind of grab onto something and all of a sudden it, like, turns into a weapon. Like, I always thought that that kind of stuff was kind of cool, where you could be like the element person. All of a sudden, like But the pulling bones thing was just like, oh my god, that was just brilliant. I loved that. So we have it where Alex is to, of course, take Rancic down here and arrest him and book him Dano. And so we, of course, have Rancic, who is to be judged and easily sent away for the rest of his life because he is to go on and murder, death, kill possibly everybody. That's a Judge Dredd reference for anybody. And so, while Rancic, of course, is to be judged, we, of course, have him going on, and in the audience we have Nadira, who a lot of people would probably go on and complain to the heavens that this girl's costume is freaking ugly as F. And I'm not going to question that. I'm just going to immediately just say, heck yeah, it probably does. It kind of looks like the guy, if you guys were to go on and see Deadpool 2, the one guy that is to be in that team with the kind of red hair, and he's, like, of course, another one of those characters that kind of gets quickly killed within that team. I want to say it's like Shatterstar or something like that. Is to be that one character, but like this girl's costume and that guy's costume, like the headpiece, identical for whatever goofy reason. So Rancic is to go on, and so Rancic is to be put into this truck with Jen kind of watching over him, and we have Rancic who's kind of happy about where he is, and Jen's like, "Why are you smiling when you're gonna go away to prison forever?" And so you're going to become a little action figure, and you're going to be just shoved in this one little thing, and you're just going to be living the rest of your prison sentence out. So all of a sudden we have it to where there's to be this kind of car accident in the middle of the road, and we end up finding out that it's Lady Deathstrike, Nadira, who is to go on and try to sabotage or ambush this. And they eventually go on and easily and quickly get Rancic out of this truck, and all of the kind of officers, Jen, Lucas, Trip, Katie, are all kind of forwarded here, and Rancic is to make his way out. Really, we have Lucas who's to talk to Trip. It's like, well, hey, like, if you can go on and read people's thoughts, and you can go on and kind of see the future at some points, because we have Trip, who is the future Green Ranger, and he of course has this special ability because he's from this alien place called Zebra, and really, like, to me, I'm like, it's not spelled the same, but it's like the animal, and I just thought that was kind of goofy, because when you see it kind of Googled, it's like XYBRIA, so it's like Zebria or something. But I'm like, what a goofy, like, you know what? Like, we really should, in a lot of these, like, Power Ranger shows, they should really be setting up a lot of different planets and a lot of different species. I would love it for a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of Power Rangers like season, but we're never going to get that. So anyways, Trip, of course, was not being able to use his psychic ability to read, of course, Rancic's mind. Why would he anyways? So we, of course, have Jen, who is talking to Captain Logan, and Jen is telling Captain Logan that they had failed at retrieving, of course, the Rancic and keeping him. And so Captain Logan is to tell all these Power Rangers, hey, you're fired. like, sucks to be you. Like, this was your one job, and it took them forever to try to obtain this man. And so he's basically relieving them all of duty, which they go on and say, it's like, oh, so we're fired now? So we then turn around and have Alex, who is again trying to retain Rancic, and this time around we have Rancic who ends up getting the better of Alex, while of course all these other officers are to go on and watch as Alex is to be killed by Rancic. And we have Rancic who slices into Alex, and he ends up exploding, and then he ends up losing his power. And so Alex is telling Jen, like, hey, take my morpher and go into the time ship. The time ship, and go on and find out that there's a number of other morphers that are in there, because you guys are gonna have to go on to race after Rancic, because Rancic is going on with Nadira and another monster named Gluten. My bad. Like, there's a scrambling number of freaking names that I have to come up with here. Gluto. Yeah, just names galore coming out of here. And so we go on and we have Rancic, who is to pick a number of celled mutants. So I'm like, okay, so besides Power Rangers Mega Force or Super Mega, it's either Mega or Super Mega, not quite sure. But they kind of deal with mutants in there. I'm like, oh, so is that the only time that they call, like, the villains the mutants? But it seems like this is another time also. I'm like, okay, so, like, now I can go on and say it's like, okay, so this isn't the first occurrence they call villains mutants. I still probably say that the best villain still probably has to be hands down probably Dino Charge. Weirdly enough. But it's been a while since I've seen Dino Charge, but I don't know, it is what it is. So you can go into the review and kind of see if that's true, if I said that somewhere, because I think that still applies. So we have our characters, because Rancic is going on and teleporting to 2001 with a number of these celled mutants, where he's going to go in and kind of open all these kind of little doors up like a microwave, and just be like, oh, okay, let's pick this villain today. Let's pick this one. Because, of course, all of these guys desperately want to be able to survive this assault against the Power Rangers, because they don't want to go back to prison. Which immediately, I'm like, we have it within, like, the third episode of a villain getting contained, and I'm like, okay, where are they going to take that little action figured villain? Because it doesn't feel like they have their own little command center within 2001, but maybe they're going to go on and, like, teleport that back into the future. Not quite sure. We'll figure that out when we get further into the story of this and how that all works out. So Rancic goes back to 2001, and so now Jen and a number of other Power Rangers are all going into this time ship, and they, of course, are going to be launched through this time gate by the Transwarp Megazord. Sure! Right! And eventually they keep on, like, it's weird to have this, like, big Megazord-like thing that is just kind of knocking his hand to like smack these things out to where they're going. When we go on and when I talk about the Megazord in this show, I'm just gonna go on and like all the Megazord pieces. I'm not gonna go so thoroughly in depth about the Megazord pieces because there's just some stuff that I just don't want to heavily learn about all the show. Because like there's some Power Ranger seasons like I know stuff from the back of my hand because it's really easy, but then there's also shows where they get like way too goofy and complicated with their names of crap, and I'm just like, why not just call it a blaster? Why not just call it a blade? Why not just call it a this? Why not just call it a that? Unless it has a really catchy name. Like we have it where like Time Force, like everything is to be called like Chrono something. Like we have a Chrono Morpher, that of course be like the normal Morpher. We of course have the Quantum Morpher. Why not just call everything Quantum Morphers? That sounds kind of cool. Sounds kind of catchy. Anyways, so the Rangers go on and get to 2001, and Circuit, who of course is the weird, goofy owl character, which I started to kind of laugh at this like owl character as he kind of like moves his head around like Rangers. I always laugh at the goofy like alpha kind of characters that they push on people, or like the weird goofy like mentorish. Like man, there is some awful like alpha slash Zordon characters in certain Power Ranger seasons, and like this, I think Circuit, I can tolerate Circuit. Like I think I could be fine with this character. But then there's also some other seasons where I'm just like, God, like this is like the worst, goofiest thing. Like Beast Morphers, they weirdly had those like robots that were just going on and like befriending the Power Rangers, and I thought that was such a goofy like addition. And that wasn't like an Alpha or like a Zordon thing, but still, like that thing was just like, really? Why do they have these goofy robots? It was so weird. So, anyways, uh, Trip and Circuit are kind of trying to wake everybody up because the ship that the Power Rangers Time Force characters are on is of course burning down, and so they're quickly trying to go on and grab all of this like the important crap, which is to really just be the Chronos Morphers, and so they're just trying to get out of there. Like, hey, let's go. So interestingly enough, we have like the Blue Ranger, who of course be this like future race car driver, which I'm like, shouldn't like they still have cars in the year 3000? Like he couldn't be a like if we could probably say that Lucas should be able to just pilot whatever. She should be one of those guys where it's like anything that can drive, he can wield it kind of thing. So let's push on. So we have these characters that of course go on, and the first thing that they are to try and do is to have these of course visual scanners, which I'm like, where was that in Hyperforce? As I would consistently probably go on and mention a number of things that Hyperforce didn't do that Time Force did, I'm like, aren't they the same technology and whatever? Like they like what is it that like they like this show had it but they didn't, because I guess they didn't realize a bunch of that stuff, because maybe they didn't go too far in depth about Time Force stuff, but it is what it is. So these characters are going on to try and scan and try to find Rancic, and all of a sudden we have Jen who bumps into this guy named Wes, who we find out is actually to be a great great granddaddy of course Alex in the distant future. And so, since Jen, I guess, can't go on and get a baby from Alex because he's sadly enough dead, maybe there's going to be at some point where Jen is going to have a kid with Wes, so that way she can have future like extending of lineage. But when really thinking about it, I know how Time Force goes, and I think Alex does eventually come back at some point because there might be some alterations in the time continuum, whatever goofy story thing. So Jen is to bump into this guy who is to be called Wes. He's on this motorcycle and he is to apologize, and she's to apologize for bumping him into one another. And so Wes makes his way off. And so all of a sudden we have our characters go on, and we eventually have them seek out this villainous threat who is to be tied to Nadira. And we, of course, have Nadira with the putties of this season, which, of course, it's the one freaking name that I did not know what exactly that was. And so I think I'm going to pause here to get that name. Cyclobots. So, luckily I had it somewhere. I just kind of pulled that out of the hat. So, we had Cyclobots. And here's the interesting thing. So, we have it to where even the putty versions, the minion kind of characters, like these Power Rangers just suck at even trying to take down the Cyclobots, like the little minion guys, which normally you would have it when like the guys would be demorphed, they could easily at least take down the Cyclobots. But not these Power Rangers, they just clearly just suck at what they're doing. Maybe eventually once they go and have a few rounds at going on and taking down these characters, maybe they'll go on and finally be able to beat down these Cyclobots. But I doubt it. So, hence why you would go through like a lot of later seasons, like I think like SPDs and stuff like that, where they would have to like be morphed to do everything. And I just kind of found that to really be annoying. I'm like, man, wait a minute, like you can't just put on like some like ninja suits and just start decking these characters down. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, does that just mean that these characters just really aren't that good at fighting? And they just need to be morphed to figure out how to be good because their stunt doubles are? Sadly enough. So, but it's true. Like, really? You can't even take the little minion characters down? Anyways, so we have the 4 Power Rangers that are to go against, of course, Nadira and Gluto within this first season. And so they try to morph and they realize that their morphing does not work out. And so like, oh crap, well, I guess we just have to kind of grin and bear it. And so we of course have the Power Rangers that end up getting decked here. And so we then go on and have it where Wes is to start to pitch in and use his motorcycle to kind of swerve and kind of hit these kind of minions and start to help out Jen. And so all of a sudden, a lot of the other Power Rangers are starting to realize that like the resemblance is uncanny between Alex and Wes. And so they're like, oh my god, like we should probably have him like fight alongside with us because Alex's morpher is going to need a DNA match, and Wes is probably going to be it. So we have Jen, who's just like, no, like, I don't think that like we can trust this guy, and so Wes just keeps on popping up and keeps deciding to just figure out a way to kind of win these characters over, to where they go on a like, okay, here's the morpher, here's the Chronos morpher, or the chronomorpher. Go ahead and become that red Power Ranger, because what else are they gonna do? So, but we'll get into that. So we have it where these guys need to morph, and so they go on and they do morph with Wes, and Wes is kind of like this excited, like, yeah, we're doing it, yeah, like this feels great. And so all of a sudden we have the cyclobots that go on and uh blast, and like all the other Power Rangers are dodging it, but we of course have Wes, who gets pelted by this and he falls over, and we of course have Kim, who's like, well, hey, like the suit is going to protect you. It's like kind of the Zordon like thing where it's like the power protects you, and so on and so forth. So Wes is like, oh, okay, great. So we have the Power Rangers that start to go on and whip out their big, massive, goofy-looking weapons, and try to start to take out uh, certain characters. We have them whip out their chrono blades, and we have them also whipping out their weird, goofy guns of sorts that are to be these big, huge, massive, like they call them like B4s and B3s, and like these big, whippy guns that look just goofy and weird and whatever. So we have the Power Rangers doing pretty well to kind of get to where like the villain side of things are to eventually start to have these characters start to run off. And so we realized at one point that the one thing that I want to figure out is that there might be side effects for these people traveling back in time. And I would like that kind of thought process. If you like travel back in time so much, maybe you get these interesting abilities or something like that. Like we have it where, of course, Katie is to be like super strong, and I'm not quite sure if she was always that strong, or maybe she's just strong now since they've gone on and like the Yellow Ranger. Like I was kind of wondering if she was always that strong, or if like that was always just a thing. Because we start to see that when we have like Trip, who's trying to like lift up this ship item, and Katie just like picks it up and just tosses it like it's nothing. Cause it's nothing to her. Yeah. I thought that was so cool. I'm like, yeah, like let's have Katie, who's like super strong, and like that's like kind of a fun thing about that character. And I love like super strength characters that kind of take and grab somebody and just kind of fling them. That was always kind of cool when you would see kind of like shows and stuff like that. So, anyways, we have Rancic, who is to all of a sudden need this serum desperately, which I guess is going to start taking him out of the playing field. And so, like, we also have it, and I think there was another villain in the later seasons, probably like right around Megaforce, whichever season that Decker was in, we had the one villainous character that was realizing that he was starting to get weaker as the show was like progressing. Like there was something about the mutation or something that like he was having problems eventually, uh like justifying there's a reason why this character doesn't go on and try to fight with the Power Rangers, because he was starting to get ill. And I like that. I like how you go on and you justify why a number of these villains have a reasoning for sitting on their thrones, besides them just being lazy pieces of like. I think that's fine. So we go on and have it where Wes is to get this morpher, and he's like, "Yeah, this feels great. This is fun. High five, everybody." And Jen is just like, "Well, no. Like, now that we can finally go on and we can morph, like, we don't need you anymore. And so we're gonna like take this morpher away from you, and you're gonna have to learn a valuable lesson of guilt tripping us or whatever into like and give you back this morpher. Like you have to give us a reason for why you deserve this kind of morpher." And Wes is just like, "But Jen, like, don't you see the family resemblance? You know you want some of this Wes because he looks just like Alex." So we go on into the third episode, and so Wes is immediately trying to go on and try to win over the Power Rangers instead of going and consistently doing his business meetings with his dad, who of course would be Mr. Collins. We consistently have Wes that's coming up with one reason or another, because we have Wes who's kind of like Bruce Wayne here, who's like this rich guy, and Mr. Collins is to, of course, like have this big business of sorts, and Wes is consistently figuring out some way to ditch every single one of these business meetings because there's a threat on the loose or something like that. So we of course have Wes, who decides on his own to find out that Nadira and of course the other frickin' monster, who of course just know the name of all the time, Guipo, Gupo. Good God, if I can come up with it sometime today, that'd be great. Guto. We have them both going on and stealing again. And so Wes decides upon himself to go and fight against these, of course, Cybertons, Cyberbots, names. And so I have to kind of get, like, used to the names. Like, especially with this first outing, I'm going to be butchering crap all over. So, and plus also these names are harder to remember than other seasons. Like, it's easy to understand, like, the Megaforce, like, minions because they were, like, Loogies, and that's a goofy, stupid name. And, like, Turbo is, like, Quantrons. Or no, wait. In Space was Quantrons, and Turbo, I think, was Piranhatrons or something like that. Piranha something. Something like that. Anyways, Wes goes on and is to try to take down all these villains and go on, and this time around it's not so easy, and so all of a sudden Wes is to starting to get outnumbered with all these villains coming at him, and so he ends up getting beaten up and clocked, and all of a sudden the other Power Rangers arrive and are starting to kind of dwindle down all these villains for all these villains to decide to run away. And so now Jen is kind of up in Wes's grill, just like, well, hey, like, what have you lost? Like, what have you, had to go on and not just like buy away with your wealth and your money and your whatever. And so all of a sudden it seems like Trip is to know exactly where Wes is to want to go with this story. But Trip doesn't say anything and Wes doesn't say anything, and so Jen just kind of leaves. And so Wes is still wanting to figure out a way to win them over. And so Wes is again in some other business meeting with a bunch of Mr. Collins's colleagues, which he tries to squeak out of. All of a sudden, seeing Trips is to talk about his where he's from, who is a zebra, and we have Trip going and telling Wes about Alex and how Alex had died and Jen had fell in love with him because, of course, Alex was to propose to Jen, and then he turns around in the exact same day and he dies. Because Jen, of course, was saying, it's like, oh, am I finally going to be able to date my boyfriend? And Alex is like, well, maybe we should do something a little bit more than that. Maybe we should finally, tie the knot. Maybe we should get married. So they've never been on a date and they're just going to get married just because they've been with one another for a long enough time. Like, I guess since you're not going to go with anybody and I have no time to go with anybody, let's just tie the knot right here. So Wes is to realize where Jen is coming from and realizing that technically every time that Jen is to possibly see Wes, it's only going to remind her of the man that she lost. And so Wes is to go on and be like, well, hey, go and help me find the rest of your friends. And I want to try to talk to them and convince them that I should go on and help them. And so they re-meet up, and so Alex is to mention, it's like, well, hey, you know what, I probably may not have lost things like you guys have, but I at least know what you guys are fighting for, and that's something that I want to fight for. And Wes is to also realize that the fate of the world is kind of at stake when these guys go out there and they're fighting. So Wes is like, well, hey, if the world is right now at stake, then I want to be part of that. And so Jen is kind of won over by that speech, and she just realizes that Wes is just never going to go away. So she gives him this morpher, and so they are, of course, to go on and seek out this actual monster. They're fighting an actual monster for this episode. And, of course, this monster ends up actually being a monster called Jitara, which is kind of like a blatant ripoff from the Avengers. Chitara? Man, did they just make up a name for this monster? Because they're just it doesn't matter what the name is, it's just Heba Kleba Kla, and it's a name. It doesn't really matter. So, in the third episode, we have them also go on and use this time jet, which of course eventually shifts and becomes the blaster for their Megazord, which they also use in this episode. So, in the third episode. So, they're going on and fighting this monster, and like I think they might be also be whipping out like their weapons as they normally are to do in this show. And so they're going on and doing a pretty decent job at taking this monster down. So the monster just decides to grow big and massive. So I guess for this show, there isn't going to be this like, hey, make my monster grow, or hey, here's this big growth grenade, or whatever. The monster just grows. So I'm like, okay, that's like, I love those kind of very goofy, repeated things that they do every single episode, where we have like the villain who's like, make my monster grow, or, you know, the thing that I just kind of said there. Where we had like, I think Lord Zed, who kind of uses his like staff to just kind of toss some lightning down, or I don't know. Anyways, to make their monster grow, it's, I don't know. Like, I don't remember much about the Power Ranger stuffs, but things and whatever. It's been a while. I've been out of the game. It's been a while since I've done anything Power Rangers related, so please forgive me for this goofy review. And plus, it's also very late for me, and so I probably should not have gone on and done this. I probably should have just waited for some other day. But if I'm not going to do it today, then I probably wouldn't do it any other day. So, also, if this isn't kind of detailed, it's probably just because I'm rushing. I'm not rushing, I'm just rushing through here. So, all of a sudden, the monster is to grow big and massive, and so, like, oh no, what do we do now? Because, of course, they don't have, like, the big, massive weapon that all combines together and they just blast it and just destroy it. Or they don't have these weird, bizarrish, like, vehicles or some goofy thing like that all of a sudden is to just blast all these, like laser beams that just wipe this thing out. No, they have to go on and give us the Megazord within the third episode so they can have something to sell to the masses. So, the one thing that I actually liked was the Megazords that would actually be like action figure like size, because I'm like, oh my god. Like, I think the later on, like, I started to realize, I was like, wait a minute. Like, instead of having to go on and, like, buy these big, massive Megazord things, realizing that I probably would not have a sizable monster to go on and fight these things. Like, instead, I can just buy the action figure of the Megazord and have, like, the action figure Megazord just kind of fight and just kind of pretend that the monster grew bigger, and then you have to, like, send in the Megazord, which is just the action figure. I'm like, oh my god, like, this is brilliant! And, like, I didn't realize that until, like, way later on in the game, and then it was just, at that point, it was just like, you know what, like, this is just too late. And it was a sad affair. And plus, during that time, I don't know how many times that like, we had moved so many times and I've lose things consistently. And normally, whatever would usually be lost would usually be some kind of, like, Power Rangers something. So it's like, oh well, like, at least I had a decent collection at some point. Anyways, so, of toys, because some people never had that. So, going on, we of course Megazord up, because of course, the time gate is to start smacking down a bunch of Zords, and so the Power Rangers are to go on and create this Megazord, which actually looks pretty decent. There are some Megazord seasons where I'm like, man, this Megazord looks like garbage. And it's really the later seasons, besides Dino Thunder and SPD. I think those were kind of decent seasons, but there are some goofy, like, Megazords. Let me know what is your goofiest Megazord that you've ever seen besides me. I'd appreciate it. So, uh, some people may not like the in space Megazord. Like, I don't really like that one because you don't like massively combine a bunch of little Zords into a big Zord. It's basically just the mega ship that just turns into this Megazord. I'm like, like it's all blue and red and spacey. Like they couldn't have come up with a different kind of Megazord at some point? Like, what the fuck? Like they could have had like a duo Megazord. Maybe they did. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it in space. I should probably go back into that too. So, anyways, they Megazord it up and they go on and combine all the Zords to make the Megazord. So we go on and I'm like, what kind of knife goofy sword thing is going to be whipping out of this sword this time around? Because we always have to go and beat these things the same freaking way. For 8 billion seasons, it's always sword sliced through. And wouldn't you call it? Same thing happens here. Every once in a while, we'll get a Megazord that just kind of shoots a thing down. I'm like, alright, like, great. Finally, a freaking sword thing that, like, ends a monster just by blasting it away. Or, like, having something creative. Like, give me an axe for one season. Like, you would have thought, like, Lightspeed Rescue would have probably had, like, an axe with the character. Or something other than a sword. But no, like, we just had a million seasons with a million swords. It's freaking irritating as F. Come up with any other way to wipe down a freaking monster. Let's do it with this thing called not a sword. But that's what happens. We get the sword that comes in, and man, when the Red Ranger whips out this sword from the Megazord, and like the wings come out of this sword, I'm like, man, this sword looks like it's gonna be freaking heavy to wield. So it'd be kind of interesting to ask the guy who ends up playing Wes in this show, like, was that sword really heavy to, like, you would have thought that had some pretty decent weight on it, but maybe not. It's like, dude, it's made out of foam. Like, I'm sure it probably weighed like 5 pounds. So they, of course, slice the monster. The monster goes down. And so we, of course, have everybody realize that, like, yeah, like, Wes has kind of earned his stripes, and, like, it seems like they can't go on and do this without him. And so, like, he's an official, like, member of this team as we start to have characters like Katie, who, of course, we, of course, have the Yellow Ranger that's really jazzed about having Wes on the team. And, like, that's how they kind of wrap up this episode with everybody just happy. Wow, I didn't even realize the girl's name was Katie. Luckily, I figured that out. So, yeah. So, really, I didn't go into much of the minions of Time Force because eventually they have weird, goofy names like Frox or Frax. Just the weird, goofy robot character, which we find out that he has a whole, like, backstory against Ransik, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, other than that, yeah, a kind of interesting show so far. Hopefully I'll be better at kind of talking about this in future episodes. When I get more into getting in the groove of knowing what all things are, because really, like, there was so much information, so much crap that I had on my phone about this season, to where it's just really difficult to just kind of scroll through all of this stuff and to figure out what all the names were. So hopefully I can get more fluent in Time Force, and so, like, this won't be a problem. So I'm sorry for anybody who is to review this and be like, God dang, like, why is it that he doesn't know all these names? I'm not aware of Time Force. Give me a break. And plus, also, I don't even know if this is going to do all that well. If anybody has seen any of my reviews lately, it's just, like, Huh. And so hopefully, maybe at one point, one of these Power Ranger seasons is gonna just turn around. Or one of these videos is just gonna turn around. I don't know about Power Rangers, but we'll see. So thank you for watching this. If you went through all the way through for whatever reason, I really do appreciate it. It's the end of the day. I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.